I just reached 250 hours on LMU and tested all the GT3 cars on all tracks. So today I decided it was time to give some tips to understand these cars better. Welcome to this new guide and let's go directly into the setup page to learn more. Let's start with traction control and ABS settings. First of all, here's a table of all the settings I would recommend on all cars. All these values could be reduced or increased by one click or more. They will give you decent car control and stability without being too stable on most cars. These settings can be subjective, so don't forget to test yourself. And on the screen, you can now see which traction control does what. Onboard traction control is the main traction control value that you will fine-tune with TC cut and TC slip angle. It's generally between 3 to 6 on most GT3s. TC power cut is how strong you want your traction control to apply and reduce wheel spin. The higher the more the TC will activate quickly, so you will generally use values between like 1 and 4 to not activate it too easily and still be allowed to use your throttle to rotate and exit. TC slip angle is how early you want your traction control to activate when having a slide or loss of control. A low value will definitely help in corners to carry more speed, but if you need traction to survive into a corner, it might activate too late and you'll probably crash if the value is too low. Front engine and understeer car like BMW or Mustang will use lower values from like 0 to 6 or 7 maybe sometimes. And oversteer cars like the Corvette or the Porsche will use between 7 to 11 TC slip angle most of the time. Small tips for rain conditions, I would just recommend adding +2 or +3 clicks to all traction control settings. It's just a safe way to deal with rain. Next is the ABS. In the current state of the game, a strong ABS value is the safest way to drive while being allowed to brake harder and use lower brake bias values. In front engine cars, it's quite easy to use lowest brake configuration combined with the ABS value, but it's also possible to increase your bias by 1 or 2% and reduce your ABS, let's say, to like 9 or 10 to keep good braking power. You'll generally get it right by using ABS 10 or 11 with most cars and conditions until you understand better your car to run less ABS with different brake bias settings. Speaking of brakes, the table also shows which brake bias I would recommend when I'm discovering a track. I'm basically using these values to make a setup from zero or just to learn the track in fixed conditions. The brake bias changes a lot between the tracks and it can also be depending on the setup or your driving and your personal experimentation. So with these values, you just want to have basically a base that works and that you can use to then improve your driving with the car that you are using. Don't forget also to run 100% brake force whatever happens in these GT3s because you will need maximum stopping power, even if it makes you use ABS sometimes. Regarding the brake ducts, the more open they are, the less temperatures there will be in your brakes, and the more closed they are, the more temperatures. You will have to play around with these. Just use your HUD or telemetry to check your brake temperatures and make sure that you do not exceed 800 degrees, otherwise they will overheat. Front brakes will be generally between 550 to 700 degrees, while rear brakes will be between 650 to 750. In order to get efficient braking, try to stay within these values. The reason why we have a tiny bit less front temperatures is because the front brakes matters a tiny bit less than the rear brakes. It's like minimal difference. Before we continue, we will regroup the majority of the values that are quite similar between most cars. I'm speaking between like the water covers, the radiator covers, tire pressures and the camber. First of all, the water temperatures you will be aiming at 90 degrees to 100 degrees and the oil temperatures will be between 100 and 120 degrees, more or less. These windows can be like increased or decreased by like 5 degrees. It does not really matter to have the exact degree, but you just want to avoid overheating basically. In qualifying, you will close the covers in order to have the best temperature window of your engine for the 3 to 6 of qualifying laps that you will do most of the time. And in race, you need to open them in order to avoid overheating. And in some cases, you will close them by like 10 or 20%, but this is really small optimization of the cars. Tire pressures needs to be at the minimum. You won't find relevant gains with them for now with the current handling. Camber needs to be with the maximum positive values, so full right. and this gives you basically the best tire temperatures and tire wear. One exception could be the BMW, where you could be running less rear camber to gain rotation and also to help the rear tires to gain temperatures, which can sometimes be a bit tricky with this car. And before I forget, I'm going to mention gear ratios. Use the shortest ones most of the time, except for Le Mans and sometimes Spa, where you will use longer gear ratios to have better top speed, or just better gearing in slow corners. Another setting that you could have to manage is the preload, basically the amount of load that the car needs to activate with the differential. Generally, you will run low values, so between 0 Newton meters to 100, and a lower value will make the car more oversteery, and a higher value will make the car more stable and understeer when you are not on throttle or on the brakes. That's basically how you should use preload. Try to mess around, like maybe click by click, like 10 by 10 or 5 by 5, it depends, and adapt it depending on your driving. Now let's talk about suspensions. Front and rear spring rates first. If you want low speed grip and decent curb management, use softer values, and in high speed corners or flat tracks, go for higher values. Optimal values will change a lot between the cars, so keep in mind these three ideas. First option is using equal suspension, because it makes the car quite balanced on all surfaces, may it be curbs or the track. It's probably the easiest way also to drive the car in most scenarios. Second option is having more front suspension than rear. This way you will have more traction, more stability, and it will also slightly increase the front height of the car, so it can help managing sometimes the curb or the bumps on the tracks, but it's really minimal. Most of the time you will prefer to still have like less front suspension and use other settings in the setup to manage the curbs. Using more rear suspension is the last option compared to front. It will do the opposite. Your car will be like more pointed towards the front. It will be more reactive and more oversteering corner entry, and a bit more tricky to manage on exit. That's basically the three ways you can manage your spring rates, and all of them can work. It just really depends on the car you are using. For the packers, when you will hit the brakes, basically you will move forward all the weight of the car, but sometimes it will make you hit the asphalt or a curb or something that will make you bottom out. Packers can be used to make sure that you do not bottom out as much as you should, or not at all, and this way your car can keep on track while not conceding pace. The BMW, for example, you will barely need them. The car is already quite good under braking and has no particular issues of bottoming, but with a Corvette you can run 0.5 cm to 2 cm of packers to make braking much more easier. Front packers can also save your life in like Spa Sector 1. I'm quite sure many people have found themselves unable to go flat out through Radiator because of the oversteer or the understeer, and using the front packers will basically delay the timing you will get the front of the car touching the asphalt, and this way you can make it through the corner without spinning or losing the car. The rear packers can be used to make the car more stable when you go back on throttle, but in my case I'm rarely using them, but sometimes you can end up with like 0.5 cm depending on the car you are using, because it will make your movement of the throttle much more safer and your car will not switch direction instantly and the weight transfer will be quite progressive. Then let's talk about the ride height. Front ride height will almost always be at 5.0 centimeters. There are some cases where you will use like 5.1 or 5.2 in some cars to avoid curbs or avoid bumps and have just better grip also in high speed corners when the compression is really too high and makes you bottom out. This is really quite rare. In modern GT3s you will almost always use 5.0 centimeters to have the best rotation and the best reactivity on corner entry. The rear ride height, however, needs to be really high to increase rotation and to have a more reactive car. So let's say I'm using 7.2 as a base, the car is really stable, I might need to use 7.5 or 7.8 just to have a bit more rotation and have a rear of the car that moves way more and gives me much more speed in all corner entries. The ride height is really key to make your car competitive, so be sure to spend the time to figure out the balance that you need and how aggressive you can go in order to maximize the pace of the car. Next step will be the dampers. Now we will require telemetry, so that's why we are on Motec to speak about them. you can see every side of the suspension divided in two parts. You have the rebounds on the left and the bumps on the right. Slow bumps and rebounds are at the center of the graphic. Their fast counterparts are on the outside part. Slow bumps are there to control how fast the suspension is compressing while you will be braking and cornering. Slow rebounds are acting on how quickly your car will put back the weight on the rear of the car while you will leave the brakes or when you will press throttle. Fast bump is used to deal with curves and bumps more easily, and softer settings will allow you to absorb curb in a better way. Fast rebounds helps to deal with multiple compression in a row and how easily you can get back on throttle once you have taken a curb. So these settings require telemetry to be properly optimized, and let's take this example on Spa with the BMW. An optimal suspension histogram is when both bumps and rebounds look symmetrical. So my front suspension, at least my front left, looks quite nice, and even also the front right, because it's more or less symmetrical. You can always see like there might be some tiny room of improvement, but it looks quite decent, and it was also efficient on track. However, my rear suspension does not exactly have a perfect shape. As you can see, the histogram in the middle is quite low, and on the right it's too high. Even if this suspension on the data is not perfect, the car was really fast and the feeling on braking and on curbs was really good. So that's really the main concern that you need to think about. Dampers can take a decent amount of time, as sometimes you will change one click and it can completely change the suspension shape on the data, and it will also completely change the behavior of the car once you will be driving. So these settings are there to make your life easier on braking and over the curves. That's what you should focus on, even if the data is not always perfect. And I know this is clearly the main setting if you spend a lot of time on the setup, where you can optimize the car the most by finding the exact suspension curve. So that's up to you. You will need a bit more knowledge. This could go on a more detailed guide, I think, but I will keep it simple for today. We're finally arriving to the last part of the guide with the chassis and the Aero. First of all, the front toe. A negative value will make the front of the car less reactive on initial steering, and a positive value will make the car way more reactive. For the rear toe, a positive value will make the rear end of the car more stable, and a negative value will make it more loose. You will generally use values like 1 or 2 clicks less on the front toe, or like 0 front toe, and on the rear toe it's like 0 to 3 clicks more. It really depends a lot on the cars that you're using. Sometimes it's a mix of both, sometimes it's both at the same time. You basically need to experiment with every car and also on the way you are driving. Rollbars now works similar to suspension spring rates, but in a more pronounced way. A stiffer value will make the car more reactive in high speed and less reactive in low speed. You will see different rollbar combinations depending on the car you drive. Some cars will use like a stiffer front and low rears, or even a detached rollbar to increase traction. Other cars will run like 1 or 2 clicks on the front rollbar and 3, 4 or 5 clicks on the rear rollbar to make it more oversteery while cornering. Last setting of this guide will be the rear wing. Currently you will want to run the lowest values possible, as it will be your main top speed gain. With overtaking being quite tricky in GT3s, you will need it to make moves more easier. However, you need to be using high enough values to keep the car on track. A low rear wing can be really tricky to drive with, especially with cars like the Ferrari that have a lot of really low wings configuration available, but they are most of the time way too difficult to drive. We could continue to go into details for many hours about every settings to run, as each car has their own optimal window, but I hope this guide will be useful for everyone who wanted to learn some information about GT3s. Don't hesitate to support the channel, as I will most likely post other guides on this game or on F1 games, and you can also follow me on Twitch where I stream sometimes my races. And yeah, enjoy your time on the game, and see you next time for another video.